Watch right now on the Front News Project. Russia is launching a large-scale offensive. 700,000 Kremlin soldiers are already on Ukrainian soil. Putin is ready to fight NATO. Finland is the first in the crosshairs. And also about Kyiv and Odesa, the Russian world continues the genocide of peaceful Ukrainians. Fiery, intense, and blazing footage from the front lines. Watch it right now. It's the fourth year of the full-scale war that Putin's Russia started on Ukrainian soil. The Ukrainian armed forces continue to heroically defend not only their homeland, but the entire civilized world from the aggression of Kremlin war criminals. Greetings! This is Front News. I'm Volodymyr Tymoshenko. For the next 30 minutes, you'll get the truth about the war uncovered by your journalists from the hottest combat zones. So, are you ready? Then let's get started. And we'll begin right away with the most terrifying news. Another hellish night for Kyiv and the region. On the night of the 23rd of June, the Russians launched a brutal attack on Kyiv using strike drones and missiles. Because of this, people died in the capital. At this point, 9 victims are known as a result of this Russian attack. The most severe situation was in the Shevchenkivsky district. There, the rescue and search operation lasted for more than 12 hours. All the details from the scene are in the report by TSN journalist Mariana Bukhar.
It was precisely 4 o'clock in the morning when the devastating event occurred. A powerful Russian ballistic missile, launched with destructive intent, directly struck and completely obliterated an entire entrance of a 5-story residential building, causing immense structural damage and widespread chaos. There are undoubtedly numerous people trapped beneath the massive piles of rubble and debris here, their fates unknown. However, the exact number of individuals and their identities remain tragically unclear, as the State Emergency Service, despite their tireless efforts, is currently unable to provide definitive information or a precise count of the victims. As of the morning, they were searching here for a woman and a child. Preliminarily, there are people there. The information is constantly changing, so we still do not know how many people are under the rubble.
It hit at 4 in the morning.
It was a missile strike, because there were no sounds of gunfire. There was only a whistling sound, and that was it. I came to when everything was already collapsing. It's very sad.
Do you already know where you'll spend the night?
No, I don't know anything yet. We hope that we'll be able to return to our apartments. I don't know what awaits us next. The building is gradually falling apart. We're waiting.
Preliminarily, we're talking about a ballistic missile. It hit a multi-story building and struck right in the center of the 5-story block. Naturally, the missile followed the ballistic trajectory. Right now, State Emergency Service employees and investigators are working at the scene. As soon as the missile debris is found, it will be possible to say with absolute certainty exactly which missile it was. The debris is probably from an Iskander-K cruise missile. We can say that it was this missile that destroyed the building.
Despite the fact that the perimeter of the building is cordoned off, rescuers still allowed several residents to sift through the ruins of their own apartments. Carefully. And this is the building across from the impact site. Imagine how powerful the blast was. If in the building across the street, these metal doors were just blown right into the elevator.
Everything has been completely blown out. We need to find some way to cover up these holes.
Was anyone home?
No, there wasn't. No one was home. If anyone had been here, everyone would have been hurt. This apartment took the strongest hit. The TVs are smashed, all the kitchen appliances are broken, the refrigerator and everything else. The bedroom is destroyed, the partitions have fallen out.
Both bedrooms are also damaged. The partitions have fallen out.
Meanwhile, they managed to recover one body from under the rubble.
Is it a human person?
It's a man. We can confidently say that, unfortunately, 7 people have already died. The body has already been recovered, and now the process of identification and recognition is underway. There are probably still 2 more people under the rubble. At least 2, that's for sure, because there are relatives who say there might be people on the 3rd floor. That's why the work is ongoing. We've already been there, so the work continues. My godmother is there, the one who baptized my child, born in 1983. She was with her daughter, the girl is 11 years old. Our house is nearby, we live here.
We weren't officially married, but we lived together for 17 years.
At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, rescuers managed to recover another body. Visually, it's a woman, so there may still be an 11-year-old child under the rubble.
Of course, I don't fully understand what's happening.
A little later, rescuers also find 11-year-old Masha.
Meanwhile, Russia is preparing for a new war with a NATO country. Finland could come under attack from the Russian world. Reuters reports this. Russia is already building new military bases near the Finnish border. We'll tell you all the details in just a minute. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces repelled a major Russian assault near Konstantinovka and destroyed 18 enemy armored vehicles. And also, the crew commander, Ptitsmadyar, captured a Russian occupier using a drone. We'll show you this footage soon. At the same time, there is panic in Russian Z channels. They fear that Ukraine might be able to carry out Operation Spider 2.0 on the territory of temporarily occupied Crimea. All the details are in our report.
Ukrainian defense forces repelled the offensive on Konstantinovka and destroyed 18 armored vehicles and 13 motorcycles, along with the occupiers inside them. Another 5 armored fighting vehicles sustained varying degrees of damage.
The occupying forces are actively trying to meticulously organize an operational encirclement of the Ukrainian defense forces and simultaneously minimize the number of personnel and equipment losses during their extensive assault on this particular settlement.
Konstantinovka is one of the locations that is part of the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. In order to capture the settlement at this point, the occupiers will have to suffer enormous losses in manpower and equipment, just as they did in Bakhmut, where around 100,000 troops were lost. And the Russians have been unsuccessfully fighting for Chasiv Yar for a year and a half already.
In the Toretsk direction, the occupiers are trying to advance toward Konstantinovka. Heavy fighting is taking place in the area of the settlement of the Livka. Moreover, a noteworthy fact is that, according to the analytical department of the Pravosprava Competent Initiative, anti-terrorist unit personnel from the FSB Directorate for the Donetsk region have been redeployed to the Toretsk direction.
In the Toretsk direction on Tuesday, the 17th of June, Russian forces carried out a mechanized attack with at least a platoon-sized unit. During this attack, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed about 15 units of Russian heavy equipment and approximately 8 ATVs.
Directly in the Kramatorsk direction, fighting is taking place in Chasiv Yar for control over areas of so-called private housing development. The defense forces of Ukraine are holding their positions and, moreover, are successfully counterattacking. According to the Russian side itself, an FSB regiment has been redeployed to Chasiv Yar this time, an entire FSB regiment. Again, this is evidence that there are virtually no operational reserves left in this direction.
Ukrainian soldiers continue to capture occupiers. While carrying out the combat mission, the FPV drone crew commander from the 414th Separate Brigade, Ptitsmadyar, with the call sign Pain, captured a Russian soldier using a drone. The UAV guided the occupier directly to Ukrainian positions, where he was detained, according to the General Staff. Ukrainian defense forces in Crimea continue to trouble the occupiers, thus paving the way for new attacks, and possibly even for the negative surfacing of the Crimean Bridge.
It is no coincidence that after the successful drone attack by the GUR on air and missile defense systems, a large-scale strike was carried out using aerodynamic and aeroballistic weapons against Russian aerospace forces airfields located in occupied Crimea. Moreover, strikes were carried out simultaneously on airfields in Jankoy Saki, and accordingly Sevastopol. In addition, strikes were launched against permanent personnel deployment points and ammunition depots.
The amount of equipment in the occupiers' warehouses is also decreasing even without strikes from the defense forces. According to estimates by Western intelligence agencies, by the end of 2024, the Russians had about 3,500 tanks of various modifications left, around 4,000 infantry fighting vehicles, and 5,000 armored personnel carriers. For comparison, in 2021, before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, there were about 6,000 tanks, 7,500 infantry fighting vehicles, and around 10,500 armored personnel carriers recorded in the warehouses. Despite its less than ideal situation, Russia continues to throw out crazy ideas and in some cases, though unsuccessfully, tries to expand the front line. The Kremlin dictator has repeatedly hinted that Odesa is a Russian city. However, we can say with confidence, Odesa is out of Russia's reach.
Ukraine's defense forces control the territory of both Mykolaiv and Kherson regions, and therefore the possibility of a direct breakthrough to Odesa region for the purpose of capturing it during a ground operation is likewise not realistic.
To meet with the self-proclaimed president of Belarus, the U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, will visit the country. The agenda of the meeting has not been disclosed, but it appears that the parties will be discussing the issue of Ukraine.
And now, an analysis of the operational situation on the much-suffering Pokrovsk front. The Russian world continues to destroy, kill, and maim here as well. On the Pokrovsk front, the enemy carried out 49 attacks near the settlements of Lush, Novotoretskoye, Mirolyubovka, Lizovka, Novokrenka, Novosergeyevka, Udakhnoye, Mirnograd, Alexeyevka, Popovyar, Malinovka, Koptevo, and in the directions of Shakovoye and Vladimirovka. The areas of the settlements of Poltavka, Malinovka, Novotoretskaya, Razina, and Pokrovsk were also subjected to airstrikes. And furthermore, Russia has launched a strategic offensive in almost all directions except for the south of our country. Ukraine does not intend to remain in passive defense. The total number of Russian troops in Ukraine has increased by almost 100,000 in just 2 months and now stands at 695,000. And another 52,000 are in the Kursk region. Regarding the Sumy region, the enemy is trying to capture Yunakivka. Fierce fighting is taking place there. The enemy is also advancing in the area of Alexeyevka. All the details are in the following report by TSN war correspondent Andriy Saprienko.
The 20th Unmanned Systems Regiment entered this zone and began creating an impassable area for the enemy on the far side of Siversk. The regiment grew out of the K2 battalion of the same 54th Brigade. Therefore, after becoming a separate unit, it kept its motivating name K2, the same as the most challenging Himalayan peak. By coincidence, the initials of the regiment commander, Lieutenant Colonel Veres Kirilo Kirilovich, also contain 2 Ks.
We have weapons that can strike at 15, 20, even 25 kilometers deep. If we spot them 200, 300 or 500 meters ahead of the infantry, we must do everything to prevent them from reaching our lines. But if they're already launching an assault, if the battle has begun, we need to make sure it ends very quickly.
The commander believes that, given limited logistics, the time for a revolution in ground drones will come soon. But here, they don't wait for the future, they bring it closer. The regiment has created units of ground robotic systems. Its operators miraculously evacuated 4 wounded from 0.
4 in 4 days. Unfortunately, we weren't able to evacuate the 5th. Otherwise, it would have been 5 in 5 days.
The cynical math of war. If these rescued soldiers had died, the state would have had to pay their families an amount equal to a month's funding for the entire regiment of unmanned systems.
Russia evacuation from the east.
The first operation was an immediate evacuation. At 6:55, I was informed about this wounded soldier. At 7:05, I gave the order to do it. There was no time to prepare. We had to act. I put everything on the line. Olin went. That Kazakh wouldn't have survived. Not a chance, not even by 900%. At 9:30, a vehicle was approaching him, and I asked my duty officer at the command post, will he be able to get in? Will he be able to do it? And I got the answer, maybe not anymore, maybe not anymore. In other words, he's fading. It was a miracle.
Did the guy survive?
He's alive.
The robots that rescue the wounded are controlled from this command post. Right now, the operators are preparing for another important mission.
This is precisely how we will be making the actual delivery on this particular system today.
What is the maximum distance you've traveled with them?
Well, the maximum
While the maximum was 2 missions in one night to 2 different positions, so easily it'll go 30 plus kilometers.
At the remote position, the drone operators need to immediately replace the Vampire drone and deliver ammunition to it.
Now it is currently heading towards the designated loading point and will soon set off to its precise position to deliver the crucial weapons and armaments. Whether it makes it there or not will determine if our guys can hold this position.
The 6-wheeled robot has to go where the enemy attacks Ukrainian transport around the clock. There's a risk of losing this unmanned tractor, but it's a chance to save invaluable lives.
I am on the line right now.
The drone is being transported to the starting position on a trailer. For the crew, the start is the riskiest moment.
And the shotgun is a must, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's for FPV drones, I assume.
Yes.
The operator with the call sign Bintik has taken control, and the wheeled robot is heading into the unknown.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And now it's time to analyze the operational situation on the Novo Pavlka sector of the front. The enemy is becoming more ferocious here as well. On the Novo Pavlka direction, Ukrainian units repelled 17 attacks by the occupiers near the settlements of Bohatyr, Novoselka, Zaporizhia, Perestroika, Komar, Mirn, Shevchenko, Svobodne Pol, and Voskresenka. Voskresenka once again came under an airstrike. 1 person was killed and another 14 were injured with varying degrees of severity. At night, the Russians once again launched a massive drone attack on Odesa. 10 impacts were recorded in the city. One of the Shahid drones crashed into a high-rise building and exploded inside. Another building sustained multiple hits. One of the sections burned down completely. People were evacuated from the burning apartments. Journalist Serhiy Osadchuk from RSN will tell and show you more about the nightmarish hell the Russians unleashed on Ukraine's Pearl by the Sea.
We are now standing near the high-rise that was attacked by one of the drones last night. As you can see behind me, there is a black hole at the level of the upper floors. I managed to enter the apartment where the impact occurred. It is total destruction there, and it's a miracle that people managed to survive. We spoke with a resident whose apartment is 2 floors above. Here's what she told us.
The rumble was so strong it just exploded. Honestly, I didn't even have time to process what was happening. The main thing is that we're alive, everything else can be rebuilt. I'm very worried about the people who were on the floor below. They suffered more. I'm worried there might have been children there. That's the most precious thing we have.
The woman is cleaning up the apartment littered with glass and recalls. After the explosion at night, the electricity immediately went out, the elevator stopped, and people ran down the stairs on foot. Rescuers helped evacuate 600 residents. And in this residential apartment, several Shaheds struck the old rooftops of the buildings at once. People are saying how powerful the explosions were.
There were 4 impacts within this small area. Out of 12 entrances, practically only the first and second were not damaged. In my apartment, the blast wave threw the table all the way into the hallway. There was hardly a single undamaged car left in the courtyard. There are more than 60 of them here.
Another drone strike caused a fire in the building. People were trapped inside the entrance, engulfed in flames. Neighbors rushed to help them.
We found out there were people inside, and the guys tried to break something down to get in because there are bars everywhere. Then, thanks to the rescuers, the guys managed to set up a ladder that kept falling. 1 person was hanging on, and at the last moment they managed to cut through the bars, and we held the stepladder from below.
As soon as the woman was taken down from the window where everything was burning, stones and burning debris started falling from the roof. The rescuers didn't have time to get away.
During the firefighting, parts of the structure collapsed. 3 of our firefighters were injured. They are all okay, in stable condition, and received medical assistance. In total, 9 people were injured in this building.
Psychologists worked on site with the victims and the elderly.
It's very difficult when people are pulled out of a deep sleep like that. Accordingly, it's very hard for them to get their bearings. They're disoriented, don't know what to do, where to go, and so on. There were also indeed some who hadn't fallen asleep yet. Their reaction was already a bit different. Therefore, in general, you could observe completely different states in people, from confusion and disorientation to acute stress reactions like crying and panic.
By morning, after the fires had been extinguished, utility workers arrived at the site of the attack. Heavy machinery was also brought in to clear the debris. Next, the damages will be assessed, but even now, it's clear they are enormous.
And now we move to the Kramatorsk direction of the front. The bloody rampage of the enemy army continues here as well. In the Kramatorsk direction, our defenders thwarted 11 attempts by the invaders to advance in the areas of Novomarkove, Chasiv Yar, and towards Mykolaivka, Stupochki, and Bondarn. And now, another extremely important topic. The Russians have concentrated nearly 700,000 of their troops on Ukrainian territory in order to carry out certain aggressive plans by the end of the summer. These plans were revealed by Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky. We will tell you more about this and other statements made by the Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief next.
Russia has amassed nearly 700,000 troops in Ukraine. The Ukrainian army is changing its structure, and the armed forces of Ukraine will no longer remain in a purely defensive posture. Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky spoke with journalists the day before and made several high-profile statements at once. The fact that Russia is preparing for a protracted war has now been stated not just in theory but with actual numbers. So, according to calculations by our general staff, last year the occupying army recruited about 440,000 soldiers, and today it numbers approximately 695,000 people. At the same time, Syrsky notes that Russia is also building up its reserves.
That's 13 divisions, a certain number of regiments and brigades, which is another 121,000. In other words, they are preparing for a long war, a war of attrition. This is their main strategy. They want to crush us with their manpower, to wear us down with their sheer numbers.
The army is indeed large. But considering the particular kind of war the Russian army is currently fighting, right now it is, of course, well, not nearly large enough. If you were to raise the crucial question of whether the present size of the army is truly sufficient for Vladimir Putin to decisively defeat Ukraine, no, it is not enough.
At the same time, the Russians have completely different objectives, according to the commander-in-chief. This summer, the occupiers will mainly try to reach the administrative borders of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, as well as create a so-called buffer zone in the Sumy region. Despite such reinforcements among the Russians, the Ukrainian armed forces will not just sit in the trenches and defend themselves. Syrsky announced that our troops will move out of a purely defensive posture. However, the directions, of course, are not being disclosed.
As for our plans and intentions, of course, we will not remain in a purely defensive posture, because that brings nothing and ultimately leads to us retreating anyway, losing people in territory. That is why we are combining defensive actions with active defense and active offensive operations. That is, wherever possible, we strike at the enemy, carry out counterattacks, and advance where we see weak spots in the enemy's defenses.
At the same time, the first such weak spots have appeared in the Sumy region. According to the deep state resource, our troops launched an offensive there the day before and recaptured the village of Andrivka. Syrsky also reminded that the Ukrainian armed forces still control part of the Kursk region, which continues to tie down Russian units and prevents them from advancing freely in the Sumy direction.
The Ukrainian army controls about 90 square kilometers of territory in the Glushkovsky district of Russia's Kursk region. These are our preemptive actions in response to a possible enemy offensive.
The commander-in-chief also spoke about the reorganization within the Ukrainian army. Thus, Army Corps have been preferred over the traditional operational commands, and this process is being actively implemented. According to Syrsky, these changes will help save personnel, meaning our servicemen who are directly carrying out combat missions will be used more efficiently. In addition, it will allow for the creation of more capable reserves, so that we have the ability to conduct active counteroffensive and offensive operations.
The first group in the command of the Army Corps, along with support units, has already completed combat coordination and taken over their areas of responsibility and assigned sets of troops. Next, the following group will do the same, and so all the Corps will take up their respective areas. In this way, we will complete the transition to the core system and the corresponding restructuring of our defense.
According to military analysts' forecasts, such a reorganization will already this year provide new opportunities for the effective use of units, repelling the Russian offensive, strengthening control over brigades, reducing our losses, and increasing enemy losses.
And now let's discuss in detail the situation on the Kupiansk and Lyman fronts. Let's be honest, these are sacred targets for Putin and his entire gang. Accordingly, the situation here is also extremely tense. On the Kupiansk front, 4 attacks were repelled in the areas of Kondrashivka, Kruglakovka, and in the directions of Peshanoye and Petropavlovka. On the Lyman front, Ukrainian defenders repelled 22 attacks by the invaders in the areas of Tverdoklebovo, Redkodub, Karpovka, Kolodets, and in the directions of Grekovka, Zelenaya Dolina, Novi Mir, and Olgovka. And now, news from North Korea. Kim Jong-un is ready to send Putin 25,000 of his slaves so that they can come to Russia and assemble combat drones for the aggressor's army. But is that all the North Koreans are prepared to do in the context of the Russian-Ukrainian war? Of course not. What is the grand plan behind Putin and his North Korean comrade Kim Jong-un's actions? Let's figure it out together.
A new batch of North Koreans for the Kremlin's needs. Kim Jong-un is reportedly preparing to send as many as 25,000 of his citizens to Russia. According to the Japanese press, citing diplomatic sources in the West and Russia, the North Koreans will be employed in drone manufacturing.
According to the source, this refers to a plant in the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in the Republic of Tatarstan, which was recently successfully attacked by Ukrainian drones.
After the highly successful drone raids on the Alabuga production facilities, none of the locals want to go on shift anymore. As a result, the Russian army has started to receive fewer Shaheds, and Putin is losing his levers of pressure and his method of terror, analysts assert.
It turned out to be no easy task to find hundreds of people in the depths of Tatarstan who were willing to work 12-hour shifts performing monotonous manual labor in a hazardous weapons factory, all while under constant pressure from the state defense order and the threat of imprisonment for disclosing state secrets.
That's when the North Koreans came to the Kremlin's rescue. The latter have no reason to complain about working conditions or 12 and even 14-hour shifts. Any job in Russia is better than what they have back home in North Korea. As a result, workshops that produce 6,000 drones a year will be able to double, if not triple, their output in just a few months or even weeks.
After the effective neutralization of Iran's military-industrial complex, the issue arose of a lack of technology exchange, a lack of components, and a lack of Iranian specialists. To fill these gaps, the Russian Federation will attempt to scale up drone production, either within its own territory or in satellite countries.
Meanwhile, the internet is already joking about the professional skills of North Korean drone assemblers, recalling how they panicked when they first saw drones at the front in 2024. However, military experts do not share the amusement of internet commentators. North Korean soldiers and engineers are not as bad as they might seem at first glance.
You have to respect your opponent. That's the first step toward victory. Underestimating your opponent, on the contrary, is the first step toward defeat, and involving DPRK citizens should, to a certain extent, help fill the gap in specialists when it comes to scaling up drone production. And accordingly, I don't rule out the possibility of technology exchange. For the Russian Federation, destabilizing the situation on the Korean Peninsula is extremely necessary right now, as a way to divert the attention of Ukraine's strategic partners from the situation directly in Ukraine.
What's also extremely important is that upon arriving in Russia, the North Koreans won't just be assembling simple Shaheeds at the factories, but much more deadly weapons of their own design. We're talking about two models of large drones at once. Externally, they are almost indistinguishable from the legendary American Global Hawk and the reconnaissance drone Reaper.
That North Korean project, I want to emphasize again, is a copy of the Predator. It's not the Strike Shahed 131, it's the Shahed 136. This is much more sophisticated equipment.
And it's precisely this kind of technology that the Kremlin is now desperately lacking. At the same time, the 25,000 North Korean soldiers that have been announced will also be carrying out other tasks on Russian territory.
25,000 is actually half the size of the operational tactical group Belgorod, which is responsible for covering the Ukrainian-Russian border and is currently opposing the units of Ukraine's defense forces. I do not entirely rule out the distinct possibility of so-called legendization, which refers to the presence of North Korean military personnel, often disguised as ordinary laborers, construction workers, various specialists, or indeed anyone else in the general population.
And if you think about it, the Kremlin doesn't actually need a full 25,000 pairs of hands for drone production, But with rifles in their hands taking part in human wave assaults, North Koreans could be very useful to Putin.
It is precisely the presence of up to 25,000 citizens, let's call them that, from the DPRK, that will allow the Russian Federation to significantly address the issues of countering the Ukrainian defense forces directly in the Kursk region, specifically the fighting near Tetkino and in the Glushkovsky district, and B, redeploy operational reserves. And it is in the Kursk region that the most combat-ready units are concentrated. The 810th Marine Brigade and the 76th Airborne Division are intended for direct participation in combat operations on the territory of the Sumy region. This, apparently, is what lies behind such a scenario.
This could become one of the main plans for the summer Russian offensive announced by the Kremlin.
That's all for today. But very soon on Front News, there will be new unique reports from our journalists brought from the hottest spots of the war so that you know the truth. This was Volodymyr Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.